They told him it was just a dog, that he wouldn't understand grief or danger or betrayal. But when Agent Romy Calhoun slipped into a coma and the man in the white coat started adjusting her IV, Finch, the golden retriever with a nose for lies, did something no human dared. He growled, he barked, and then he leapt, not just to save a partner, but to stop a war no one knew had already begun. Maple Ridge, Oregon, had always been a quiet city, nestled between cedar forest and snow-fed rivers, but that morning it held its breath under a ceiling of slate-gray sky. The Cascade Skyport, which usually hummed with departures and morning announcements, was sealed in yellow tape. Sirens had long faded, but the air still clung to something sharp, something chemical. Inside, Halcyon. Mercy Medical Center, a building of glass and brushed steel that overlooked the riverbend silence, reigned in ICU Wing B. Room 417 was sealed tight, its digital access code restricted to emergency personnel only. On the polished hallway floor just outside the door, a golden retriever sat like a statue, silent, unblinking, and very much awake. His name was Finch, a 7-year-old golden with deep amber fur and a streak of silver along his tail. His build was lean but solid, a body shaped by hours of tactical drills and high-stress field work. Unlike many of his breed known for their easy charm, Finch had a seriousness in his gaze calculated, grounded. He was a Federal Detection K-9 trained in biochemical hazard recognition. More than that, he was her partner. Romy Calhoun, 37, was currently fighting for her life behind the reinforced ICU glass. A federal agent with the Biological Enforcement Division, she had led the raid on the Cascade Skyport's shipping warehouse the night before. Finch had been beside her when the blast hit. Now she lay motionless, surrounded by the cold chorus of machines and the hushed urgency of medical staff. Monitors beeped, tubes flowed, but Finch had eyes only for the door. Something about it made his ears twitch every time it hissed open. It wasn't grief. It wasn't hope. It was scent. That scent, barely detectable to human senses, was seared into Finch's memory. It had hung in the air right before the explosion at the warehouse, clinging to broken crates and melted plastic. Finch had smelled it in the moments before Romy's tactical mask cracked. He had smelled it again when her knees gave way. And now, it was here. The first time the man in the white coat walked past Finch didn't move. But his ears flattened slightly. A low rumble formed in his chest. Dr. Eli Mercer, according to the badge clipped to his coat pocket, was tall and slim, likely mid-40s, with short ash-blonde hair and pale skin that made the veins in his hands easily visible. His eyes, a muted gray-blue, seemed to skim over everything as though searching for patterns invisible to others. His walk was efficient. Not hurried, not slow, just precise. He gave Finch a glance as he approached the ICU door, the corner of his mouth barely lifting, in what could have been mistaken for a polite smile. But Finch's growl deepened. The man paused, fingers hovering over the keypad to the ICU. "Easy there," he said, calmly, without even looking down. "You're just doing your job." The door opened. He disappeared inside. Finch stood up, then, slowly, shoulders tense, and approached the glass. His nose nearly touched the surface as he stared through it. His body was stiff tail, low breath shallow. Inside, Dr. Mercer leaned over Romy, checking the IV bag. The growl in Finch's throat returned deeper, this time almost a warning. His paw lifted slightly as if resisting the urge to move closer. When the doctor emerged minutes later, Finch was still standing at the glass. His nose twitched. The scent wasn't strong, but it was there. That same sharp chemical edge, faint but exact. It was on Mercer's sleeve. Finch took a step forward, blocking the hallway. His stance wasn't aggressive, but it was firm. Eyes locked onto the doctor's cuffs. Nose flaring. Mercer didn't stop walking. "Relax," he said smoothly. "The agent's in stable condition." "You'll see her soon," but Finch didn't relax. Not even after the man disappeared down the corridor. Not even when another nurse tried to coax him away with water. Not even when the intercom called for a shift change. He sat back down, body still rigid, his ears trained not on the sounds of the hospital, but on something deeper, sharper, older instinct. Because Finch knew two things. That scent was not supposed to be inside a hospital. And the last time he smelled it, Romie Calhoun almost died. The next morning arrived over Maple Ridge like a whisper, cloaked in pale sunlight, struggling through a veil of mist. The river that coiled behind Halcyon Mercy Medical Center steamed, faintly mirroring the early chill of spring that still clung to the foothills of the Cascades. On the hospital rooftop, dew shimmered on metal rails, but down in ICU Wing B, time had thickened into something more rigid, held together by soft beeping monitors, gloved footsteps, and the quiet refusal of a dog to move. Finch, the golden retriever assigned to the Federal Biohazard Task Unit, had not left his post since Romie Calhoun's admission. Now, in his 7th year of service, Finch had developed a kind of solemn grace, uncommon even among working dogs. His fur was a warm, golden hue, growing slightly lighter around his muzzle, a sign of age more than exhaustion. His ears, soft and triangular, were always alert, and his gaze sharp. Steady penetrating seemed to read rooms before humans could. Finch wasn't just trained. He was chosen years ago for his uncanny ability to lock onto chemical cues others missed. Romie often said Finch didn't just smell threats, he recognized them. At 7:42 a.m., the sliding doors at the far end of the ICU hallway whooshed open. The man who stepped in was the same as before, tall, thin, pale-skinned, with sunken cheeks and neat ash-blonde hair. Dr. Eli Mercer, or so his badge claimed. He wore a navy lab coat over light gray scrubs, and in his hand was a black tablet he barely looked up from. His shoes made no sound on the tile as he approached room 417. Finch rose before Mercer had taken his third step. The growl began low, less vocal, more vibrational. A sound born from memory. Finch's muscles tensed, his paws stiff against the floor. His head lowered. The scent was back. Mercer paused in front of the room's keypad. He glanced at Finch, his face unreadable. "Persistent," he muttered. "Loyal, I suppose." His fingers tapped the access code and the door hissed open. Inside the room, Agent Romie Calhoun remained unconscious. Her vitals stable, her breath even. The machines around her blinked rhythmically, but Finch didn't look at them. He looked at Mercer's sleeve where the scent from yesterday still clung like residue, a chemical marker buried beneath the clean linen soap and antiseptic. Across the floor, Dr. Corbin Vance sat at the monitoring station sipping from a thermos far too battered to be hospital-issued. At 31, Corbin still looked too young to wear the title of doctor with authority, but that didn't stop him from carrying himself with a quiet kind of certainty. He was lanky with a thick mop of coffee-colored hair and glasses that always slid halfway down his nose. He wore his insecurity like a second stethoscope, visible, but never quite in the way. His scrubs, dark green and wrinkled, clashed with his white coat, which always looked like it had been through too many emergency shifts without a break. Corbin noticed the growl first. He turned from the monitor and saw Finch's rigid posture. "Same guy?" he asked softly, looking toward Gina, a senior nurse walking past with a tray. Gina Martell, a stout woman with sharp eyes and a Boston accent that could still slice through steel, after 20 years in Oregon, glanced sideways. "That's Dr. Mercer again. The dog hates him." Corbin narrowed his eyes. "You know anything about him?" "Where he's from," Gina shrugged. "Transferred from a research hospital upstate, supposedly. Showed up yesterday with all the right paperwork. Though, I'll be honest, something about him sets my teeth on edge. Doesn't blink much." Finch let out a short, sudden bark. Corbin turned to see Mercer walking out of Romy's room, eyes on his tablet. The dog took a step forward. "Whoa," Corbin said, standing. "Easy, buddy." Finch didn't move. He was focused, locked in. His nostrils flared. Corbin waited for Mercer to disappear down the hallway before approaching the nurse's terminal. He tapped into the staff directory and typed Mercer Eli. Nothing. He tried again, this time with broader search parameters. Still nothing. He walked to the security desk and scanned the personnel login register. No one named Eli Mercer had been recorded entering through staff clearance. His access to room 417 had been granted manually override level. His pulse ticked faster. He returned to the nurse's station, reopened the database, and searched the attending physician's file list for ICU patients admitted in the last 48 hours. Romy Calhoun's attending was listed as Dr. Adrian Poe, a cardiopulmonary specialist currently on leave. No substitution form filed. No digital sign-in from Mercer. Corbin leaned back, heart drumming against his ribs. "That guy's not in our system," he said aloud, mostly to himself. Finch turned his head as if hearing the unspoken conclusion before the words formed. The dog's ears perked, his gaze narrowing to the empty hallway Mercer had disappeared into. Then he sat poised, but still like a soldier waiting for the order to strike. Corbin looked back toward room 417, where Romy lay in silence. "Hell of a thing," he whispered, "for someone to slip past our system in this hospital." Evening crept into Maple Ridge, slowly washing the steel and glass facade of Halcyon Mercy Medical Center in a faint lavender hue. The river behind the complex had gone still, as if waiting for something. On the ICU floor, time thickened again. Machines clicked and breathed. Nurses moved in practiced patterns, and Finch did not sleep. The lights overhead dimmed to night mode blue. Most visitors had gone home. The ICU, though still busy, had taken on a quieter rhythm, like the hush before a storm. Finch remained at his station outside room 417, his body unmoving, his eyes vigilant. From behind the ICU glass, Romy Calhoun lay exactly as she had for the past 31 hours, still silent, but not gone. The machines reported a stable rhythm until they didn't. At 9:18 p.m., without any prior warning, Romy's oxygen saturation began to dip. Not just slightly, but sharply plummeting past thresholds no sedated patient should reach. The monitor let out a sharp tone. The ICU nurse at the terminal. Jessa Monroe, a petite woman with sharp features and a high ponytail that bounced with every hurried step, frowned and turned her gaze toward the screen. "We've got a drop in 417, she said, quickly, reaching for her headset. Her voice was steady, though her fingers fumbled briefly with the screen controls. Finch's ears twitched a full second before the alarm triggered. Then his body rose. He had been trained to stay seated, stay calm, observe. But when Finch felt the shift, he moved. His nose cleared. His body pushed up against the glass. His tail stiffened like a blade. Then, without warning, he let out a long, piercing bark, a sound more like a siren than a dog's voice. Not a bark of fear, a bark of alert. Inside the small security booth connected to the ICU, Corbin Vance sat reviewing the logs he had flagged earlier that day. The small, dimly lit space smelled of stale coffee and burnt circuitry, and the single monitor flickered faintly between surveillance feeds. Corbin wore a fresh set of scrubs, now having worked well past his rotation. He hadn't gone home. Not when Romy's record still showed Mercer as her attending. He heard Finch's bark first, then the chime of the cardiac monitor. He glanced up to see Eli Mercer in room 417, bent over the IV line. His fingers were moving quickly, adjusting something at the base of the fluid bag. Corbin squinted. The doctor wasn't recording changes, wasn't scanning vitals, wasn't even checking the readouts. He was doing something, and whatever it was, Romy's numbers were falling. Corbin shot to his feet. He grabbed his access card and sprinted down the hallway. Code yellow in 417, he shouted toward Jessa, who was already dialing an override. Finch barked again, pawing hard at the glass. Jessa moved to the door controls, but Corbin waved her off. "Let me see security footage," he said, "now." The screen showed Mercer twisting a syringe. No, not a syringe. A port connector. He was swapping the line. Romy's vitals had dropped below 75% O2 saturation. Too low, far too low. Finch growled low and loud. Then he moved. The dog broke left, charging toward the security door at the far end of the hall. The entryway, a narrow corridor with coded locks, opened just as Jessa's hand flew to her badge. Finch barreled through before the door could fully retract. Down the hall, Mercer exited room 417, calmly, tablet in hand. Finch came skidding around the corner and slid to a halt. His hackles rose, his tail lowered. He stood directly in Mercer's path. The man froze. Finch growled. "I need to get to the lab," Mercer said coolly. "This patient requires an immediate biochem screen. Step aside." Finch did not move. The elevator behind Mercer chimed. Corbin arrived seconds later, breathless, his badge raised in one hand. "Dr. Mercer," he said, voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "We need to verify your clearance." Mercer's eyes narrowed. "I'm on an emergency authorization. There's no time for games." Finch took a step closer, nose twitching. His head tilted slightly, chemical trace confirmed. Mercer reached for his coat pocket. That was a mistake. Finch lunged. He didn't bite, but his paws hit Mercer's chest with the force of a small freight train slamming him into the wall. The man's tablet clattered to the floor, and from his pocket slid a laminated card. Corbin scooped it up. It wasn't a Halcyon badge. It wasn't even for a hospital. The photo ID read, "Dr. Landon Hale, Senior Technician, Aluvix Research Initiative." Corbin's stomach dropped. Aluvix wasn't a medical center. It was a private contractor subcontracted for government biological research, and under investigation. Mercer or Hale shoved Finch back, scrambling for the elevator. But before he could enter, Finch lunged again, this time knocking him sideways into the floor. Corbin signaled security with his radio. "I need lockdown in East Wing ICU. Suspect attempting to flee. Repeat lockdown now." Within moments, 2 guards arrived. Hale, pinned beneath Finch's braced body, didn't resist further. He didn't speak. He just stared at Romy's room, as if still calculating his failure. Later, when the guards led him away, Corbin turned to Finch, who had returned to the ICU door. The dog didn't bark again. He simply sat eyes on Romy the way he always had. His body relaxed only when the vitals on her screen began to steady once more. An hour later, Corbin sat with the hospital's compliance officer in a small conference room reviewing the file. Landon Hale had once worked as a senior biochemist for Aluvix. He was removed 6 months ago after leaked reports showed he had manipulated trial data to suppress evidence of toxicity in synthetic compounds. Why he was here, how he bypassed security, and what exactly he had attempted to inject into Romy's line were questions for federal investigators. But one thing was clear: Finch had known. Before the monitors, before the systems, before the humans caught up, the dog had known. The morning after the lockdown incident carried with it a stillness that wrapped the city of Maple Ridge like a tight shroud. Fog curled along the riverbanks, and the glass panels of Halcyon Mercy Medical Center gleamed faintly under a sky that couldn't decide between rain and cold light. Inside, the ICU wing operated under reduced volume. Nurses moved more deliberately, voices, lowered glances cautious. Everyone had heard something. but no one knew exactly what had happened the night before, except Finch. The golden retriever had not left his post outside room 417. His fur was slightly ruffled from a restless night, though his composure remained immaculate. He was built strong but not bulky, his golden coat fading near the muzzle with age, his body held in a constant posture of alert repose. He wasn't just waiting for Romie Calhoun to wake up, he was watching, sensing, calculating. At 7:24 a.m., Finch stood suddenly, nostrils flaring toward the eastern corridor. His ears twitched, head low. The scent was faint but present, chemical foreign, and layered with that same synthetic bite he had learned to fear. Not identical to what he smelled on land and Hale, but close enough to raise his guard. Moments later, Dr. Corbin Vance walked into the ICU wing. His dark green scrubs were wrinkled, and his coffee cup steamed against the back of his hand as he took a long, distracted sip. His hair was messier than usual, and the bags under his eyes hinted at a second night without proper sleep. He looked at Finch and stopped. "What is it?" he murmured, noting the dog's rigid stance. Finch took several deliberate steps down the hall, nose held low. He stopped in front of a medical-grade refrigerator embedded into the wall, one of several used for temperature-sensitive pharmaceuticals. He sat. Corbin frowned. "No way," he whispered, then walked to Finch's side. The refrigerator unit had a digital lock pad and a hospital-issued barcode scanner. The LED screen above it glowed a calm blue, secure. Corbin looked over his shoulder. No one nearby. Lila Reed, a junior oncology orderly, passed by just then. She was petite, with long braids coiled atop her head, dressed in burgundy scrubs with cartoon print sneakers. Her voice carried a natural nervousness, but she spoke clearly. "That's the fridge for Tier 2 meds, pharmacy only. Has it been accessed today?" Corbin asked. She shook her head. "Not since midnight rounds. I logged it. I can pull the timestamp if you need it." Corbin nodded, then swiped his clearance badge and entered his override code. The fridge door clicked open with a hiss of cold air. Inside, rows of neatly organized vials, syringes, and sealed packages gleamed under internal LED strips. Nothing looked obviously out of place, until he crouched and opened the lower service panel. Behind a vented compressor plate tucked just out of sight was a soft black pouch taped to the back wall. Corbin's pulse jumped. He carefully pulled it free, placing it onto a nearby sterile tray. The pouch was unlabeled, completely blank, save for a barely visible red triangle embossed into the fabric. He didn't need to open it to know this wasn't standard hospital supply. The emblem matched the incident report at Cascade Skyport, the one Romie had tried to trace before she was hospitalized. Finch let out a low, vibrating growl. Corbin straightened and looked around. No one else had seen it yet. "Stay," he told Finch gently, stepping to the emergency panel embedded in the wall. He slapped the button. An alarm began to pulse, low and insistent. A red strobe light above the corridor blinked to life. Dr. Vance, to command Corbin, said into the intercom. "Possible bioagent found. Immediate lockdown request. ICU-B fridge breach. Initiate quarantine protocol." Doors began to seal. Shutters rolled down from the ceiling. Halcyon Mercy Medical Center was going into full lockdown. It began with a flicker. Not loud, not sudden, just the faintest dimming of fluorescent light in ICU-B, as though the hospital were briefly holding its breath. Outside, the fog that had swirled around the Maple Ridge Hills all morning had begun to lift, revealing the first hints of a gray-blue sky. But inside Halcyon Mercy Medical Center, the air was thick with something unseen. And it wasn't just tension. In room 417, Romie Calhoun's fingers twitched beneath the stiff hospital blanket. Her eyelashes fluttered once, twice, and then slowly opened. Her eyes, hazel with flecks of gray, moved in quiet confusion before focusing on the soft golden head resting beside her arm. Finch. The 7-year-old golden retriever, his fur slightly darker around the ears and tail, had positioned himself by the side of her bed, unmoving as if carved from memory itself. His body was stiff. His head rose the moment Romy's breath deepened. "Hey, partner," she whispered hoarsely. Finch's ears perked, and for the first time in 2 days his tail thumped gently against the floor. But the moment of reunion was fleeting. The overhead lights flickered again, and this time they didn't come back. A mechanical whine echoed through the ICU wing, followed by a low rumble that vibrated through the walls. Then a series of metallic clicks. Every digital monitor in the room blinked off. Ventilation slowed. In the hallway backup, power began to hum, but the rhythm was uneven. An alert tone buzzed, confused and distorted. Romy tensed. Her body was still weak, but her instincts remained sharp. "Finch," she murmured, pushing herself upright. "What do you smell?" Finch turned his nose upward, sniffing with short, deliberate bursts. Then he pivoted sharply toward the far corner of the room, where a ventilation grate sat low on the wall, nearly invisible, recessed behind a rolling cart. He growled. Then, for the first time since she woke, Finch looked back at her. Their years of training flooded her thoughts. Hand signals. Emergency protocols. Special cues embedded into his collar's command module. Romy's right hand moved with practiced slowness as she reached beneath the bedsheet and tapped the curved device resting against her hip, a portable alert controller. 3 quick taps. Finch reacted immediately. He bounded to the center of the room, stood on his hind legs, and bit the fire alarm trigger casing high on the wall. The plastic shattered in his jaws. A shrieking alarm erupted through the ICU. Simultaneously, Finch ran to the vent, placed his front paws against the wall and began pawing at it, fast and sharp. Outside in the sealed hallway, Dr. Corbin Vance had just finished briefing Director Eliza Callahan and the incoming Homeland Liaison. He heard the alarm and spun on his heel. "Room 417, he said. Callahan was already issuing commands through her radio. "Ventilation lockdown now. Purge grid 3. Override negative flow sequence." Finch's nose pressed close to the vent. The scent was undeniable now. The same acrid chemical masked just enough to avoid detection by the average sensor, but not by a dog trained to smell war. Inside the security control room, a second emergency signal registered on the system, this one triggered manually from a patient's room cross-referenced with K9 alert codes. One of only 5 protocols in the country designed to be activated by a K9 unit during ventilation-based toxin threats. The system responded. A roar of air pulled through the vent as emergency purging began. The room's pressure dropped as clean air flooded in from sealed oxygen tanks and sealing ducts reversed flow. In the hallway, blast doors slammed shut with the hiss of pneumatic seals. Red lights painted the corridor in pulses of warning. Director Callahan's voice was steady but cold. "Evacuate adjacent wards. Any exposed individuals go to quarantine 3. Vance, stay with the dog." Corbin nodded already, sprinting toward room 417. He met Jessa Monroe halfway there, her hair, out of its usual ponytail face, flushed from running up 2 flights of stairs. "The override's holding," she said breathlessly. "Vent neutralization active. Patient awake." Jessa said, eyes widening. She woke up before the alarm. Corbin stepped into the room. Romy sat half upright, sweat beading at her forehead, but her posture sharp. Finch was back at her side, eyes fixed on the vent. "You just saved this hospital?" Corbin said quietly. Romy shook her head and looked at Finch. "He did." Rain beat against the windows of Halcyon Mercy Medical Center as the ICU settled into another tense hour after the failed toxin infiltration. Romy Calhoun, though still weak, remained fully conscious and alert. Finch sat beside her bed, calm on the surface but watchful. Every time a footstep echoed outside his ears, flicked toward the door. Then came the one they had been waiting for, though neither of them knew it until the moment arrived. Henry Ashford, the hospital director, entered room 417 without announcing himself. A man in his mid-50s, sharply dressed hair meticulously styled with a demeanor colder than the tile underfoot. He didn't bring a nurse or a tablet, just a quiet tension. Finch stood the moment Ashford crossed the threshold. Ashford locked the door behind him. He spoke to Romy calmly, with veiled condescension. He acknowledged her interference, hinted at her unexpected survival, and confessed casually that he had overseen cooperation with military pharmaceutical contractors. Patients with no families, no paper trail were perfect test cases, he said, especially when masked behind experimental compassionate use labels. Romy said nothing, but her hand hovered near the emergency lockdown panel. Ashford's hand moved toward his jacket. Romy pressed the button. The alarm sounded. The door locks re-engaged. Finch lunged. Before Ashford could draw the hidden pistol from his inner coat, Finch tackled him at full force, knocking the weapon aside as it fired into the floor. Romy slid out of the bed, and away from the line of fire, her breath labored but controlled. Moments later, security stormed the ICU. Ashford was restrained without a fight, but his expression never changed. As he was led away, he muttered something only Romy and Finch could hear. "You stopped one room. But this building has more than one hallway." The skies over Maple Ridge had not cleared, but something had shifted. The air above Halcyon Mercy Medical Center no longer felt suffocating, just heavy with a tension that had been named unmasked and handcuffed. Inside, the East Wing red strobe lights had dimmed, alarms silenced, and room 417 remained under heavy surveillance, guarded not only by medical staff but federal law enforcement agents now flooding the building. 3 black SUVs had pulled into the emergency lane 20 minutes earlier. The first man to exit was Special Agent Colton Reeves, mid-40s, tall and broad, with a square jaw, close-cut brown hair dusted with gray, and the calm efficiency of someone who had seen disasters unfold in silence. Reeves had a dry voice, crisp like gravel, and a presence that made hallway conversations stop mid-sentence. His dark gray tactical vest bore the unmistakable yellow print FBI. Following him was Dr. Lena Caro, a civilian science advisor with the Joint Federal Biothreat Task Force. She was in her early 50s, lean with short-cropped silver hair and rectangular glasses that made her blue eyes look even sharper. Unlike the agents beside her, she carried no weapon, just a leather-bound field journal and a satchel full of sealed sample containers. She moved with purpose, not speed. In the central triage room, now repurposed as a command center, Romy sat upright in a wheelchair, dressed in a clean hospital gown with a blanket over her legs and an IV port still attached to her wrist. Her face was pale drawn from exhaustion, but her voice was firm. Beside her sat Finch, who rested his head on her knee, but kept one ear turned toward the doors. Across from her, Reeves leaned against a counter, arms crossed. So Ashford was the last link. Romy shook her head. No, he was local logistics. He didn't develop the compound. He didn't plan the dispersal. Caro opened a metal case on the table and removed a sealed vial, holding it up against the light. We ran the signature. Modified neurotoxin with a delayed-release aerosol base. Stable for 6 hours before activation. Would have circulated through the ICU vents before anyone noticed. Corbin Vance stepped into the room carrying a slim laptop under one arm. His hair was damp from the rain, and his expression held the kind of brittle tension that comes from being too right too soon. He was no longer in scrubs, but had borrowed a gray zip-up jacket and jeans from the hospital supply. Still no badge, no lab coat, just someone who refused to be background anymore. I have something, he said, nodding toward Reeves and Romy. Audio logs. Facility security tapes. Hale and Ashford had a side channel in the building's security system. I can show you. Reeves stepped aside. Do it. Corbin set the laptop on the table, fingers dancing across the keys. The screen flickered to life, displaying time-stamped camera footage from 3 nights earlier. It showed Landon Hale disguised as Dr. Mercer meeting Ashford in the underground pathology storage. No sound, at first just hand gestures and the passing of a sealed case. Then, another clip, Ashford, standing alone, speaking quietly into his phone. I've told them we're phasing out the trial. They're sending someone for cleanup. We'll get one more shipment in through the Cascade Courier, same packaging, same login route. After that, we're clear. Romy leaned forward, jaw tightening. Cascade Courier? That's the shipment we intercepted. Finch raised his head, growling low. Reeves nodded toward Caro. Run it against existing case threads. Anything matching that channel gets red flagged. Corbin, you're now classified as a primary witness. You'll be debriefed in federal custody starting tomorrow. Corbin blinked. Wait, I'm not a suspect, right? You're a whistleblower in a bioweapons conspiracy. That makes you a priority. Caro replied, not unkindly. Finch nudged Romy's arm. She scratched the side of his face, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. He's the one who caught the thread. I was in a coma. The dog pulled the fire alarm. Caro turned her attention to Finch. This is the K-9 agent. Romy nodded. Finch, 7 years old, hazmat scent specialist. He doesn't just detect, he remembers. He connects. Reeves pulled a velvet box from his jacket. On behalf of the Federal Task Force, we'd like to formally recognize Officer Finch with the Medal of Service and Civilian Valor. He stopped a dispersal event before a single sensor even picked it up. Corbin clapped gently, glancing at Finch. That's one hell of a dog. He's more than that, Romy said. He's a witness, a partner. The room fell quiet as Reeves turned toward the hallway. Director Callahan is finalizing the lockdown with the DOJ. All patient transfers have been rerouted. This building is now a federal site. Ashford's in holding, and Hale is being flown out to Quantico. Caro added, but you should all understand this wasn't local. The funding came from offshore subsidiaries. The testing was coordinated through Shell Labs in 3 different states. Ashford wasn't a mastermind. He was a facilitator. So, who's next? Romy asked. Caro closed the metal case. That's what we're going to find out. But this was only a field test. 2 weeks had passed since the storm at Halcyon Mercy, and though Maple Ridge had returned to its usual rhythm, coffee shops humming streetlights blinking calmly through spring rain, the shadows cast by what happened inside that hospital had not faded. For most of the town, the event had been reduced to vague rumors, a brief lockdown federal agents, something about a gas leak and a staff restructuring. But behind sealed doors in Washington, D.C., the truth was being recorded. The hearing room inside the U.S. Capitol's committee building wasn't dramatic. No marble columns or flashing cameras, just clean wood panels and steady overhead lights. A semicircle of congressional representatives sat behind polished microphones, their faces drawn with fatigue and guarded curiosity. Some were career bureaucrats in sharp suits, others like Rapides. Meredith Allen, a no-nonsense woman in her early 60s with iron-gray hair and an upright military bearing, listened with piercing eyes that seemed to cut through ambiguity. Her hands never left the surface of her yellow notepad, and she only asked questions when the silence demanded it. Across from them sat Agent Romy Calhoun, now in a formal Navy uniform, her injuries long since wrapped and healed. She looked composed, stronger, steadier, but her voice carried the quiet steel of someone who had walked through fire and refused to burn. Beside her, in a modified harness with a federal emblem stitched into the leather, lay Finch. The golden retriever sat proudly, but at ease, his fur brushed to a polished shine. The new patch on his collar read Sentinel Class K9, Federal Division. Finch had not only prevented a catastrophe, he had become a symbol of what vigilance meant in a world increasingly blurred by lab coats and briefcases. We detected the synthetic compound too late. Romy was saying, her voice clear, but Finch responded before it reached active levels. His memory for scent is not just a reflex. It's a pattern recognition system that rivaled our best algorithms. Representative Allen adjusted her glasses, and the compound, as we understand, was not on any known domestic registry. No, Romy answered. It was developed under the guise of a private humanitarian research program, but the structure showed aggressive neurologic breakdown properties. It was a weapon. And Director Ashford, someone asked. Awaiting trial in federal custody, but he was just a node. His bank account, his records, even his staff logs, half were masked through foreign proxies. And the whistleblower, Dr. Corbin Vance. He's been recruited by the National Pharmaceutical Security Oversight Bureau as an internal integrity analyst. That news had spread fast in certain circles. The Bureau, a notoriously secretive organization, rarely accepted outside personnel. But Corbin had not only exposed an infiltration, he'd mapped it in a way no agency had expected. He was now stationed out of their Denver field office, though Romy had received his encrypted message just that morning, still watching the freight lanes. Found a signature match in Amarillo. You were right. It's not over. As the hearing closed, Representative Allen stood and approached Romy personally. Her voice, low but earnest, surprised Romy with its softness. I lost a son in a chemical attack overseas. Years ago. If someone like Finch had been there, things might have ended differently. Thank you for not hesitating. Romy nodded, emotion flickering for the briefest second across her expression. Finch, sensing her shift, leaned gently into her side. That evening back in Maple Ridge, the air was clearer than it had been in weeks. From the rooftop garden of Halcyon Mercy, now with additional security cameras and reinforced air filters, Romy stood in her standard-issue windbreaker, her hands in her pockets, hair loose in the breeze. Finch sat beside her tail, resting on the stone tiles watching the horizon. The garden had changed since the attack. New benches had been added. A small plaque had been installed near the corner planters, bearing no name, only a quote. Courage begins where protocol ends. Far above, a plane soared across the sky, its tail lights blinking against the dusky backdrop. Romy watched it ascend, her eyes narrowed but calm. She knelt, fingers tracing the rim of Finch's collar before slipping gently to scratch his ear. "Ready, Finch," she whispered, voice half lost in the wind. Finch gave a soft huff, then thumped his tail once slow and steady against the rooftop tile. That was his answer. Sometimes the strongest warning doesn't come from a siren or a machine, but from the silent loyalty of a creature who listens to what humans ignore. Finch didn't speak. He didn't reason, but he remembered, and through that memory he protected hundreds of lives. Maybe it wasn't just training. Maybe it was something more. Something placed in his heart by a higher hand. This story reminds us that miracles don't always come as fire from the sky. Sometimes they come on four legs with a wagging tail and eyes that refuse to look away from danger. Just like Finch stood between a toxin and the people he loved, perhaps we too are called quietly daily to stand for what's right even when no one is watching. In a world that often feels broken, may we never forget that trust, love, and faith are stronger than any darkness. If you believe there are still miracles in this world, if you believe that loyalty is a gift from God, comment Amen below. Share this story with someone who needs hope. Subscribe to this channel for more stories of faith, courage, and second chances. And may God bless and protect you and your loved ones always.